Hello, everybody, and welcome to this RIC conference. For those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Glynn. Was involved in RIC from the off in both Dundee and Glasgow, and then latterly in Edinburgh, though I'm currently sitting in very sunny Strasbourg. So big welcome to everyone, and really glad to discover that the reports of RIC's death were an exaggeration. Any sort of big conference, and particularly one online, is quite an unwieldy thing, and I think we're all very aware that there won't be the opportunity for a fraction of the discussions and points that people would like to make. So I think it's just important to remember that this is only a starting point from which to make new links, new structures, and new strategies. Our first session is going to look at why Indie can be a vehicle for radical change from the perspective of our now two speakers. There won't be time for spoken questions in this one, but you're welcome to use the chat. Of course, Indie isn't necessarily radical. We need to make sure that the radicalism is in there in the campaign, because it will be too late afterwards. And my research on Bangladesh independence really brought that one home to me. It's no good saying, and this is something I'm sure we've all heard many, many times, don't rock the boat, we'll get Indie first and then decide what we want. History shows that once less radical nationalists get their feet firmly under that table, they'll feel no need to listen to anyone else. But that's enough of me. So our first speaker is Katie Gallogly-Swan. So Katie is an expert on global trade and environmental policy. So I'll hand you over to Katie.
Morning, folks. Can everybody hear me okay? So I did chuffed to be here today, a bit surprised to be called an expert, but I'll take it, and to spend the day with you all. So I've been a supporter of Scottish independence since before the referendum, having been brought up in an Irish Catholic family in Coatbridge, with a family who had little regard for the British state, to put it mildly. In the past few years, my feelings about independence have oscillated as my own political opinions and perspectives have developed, as I hope they continue to do. I still hold most of the beliefs in independence I held in 2014 on the normative democratic representation aspect, on the opportunity to build a more radical state, and on pragmatic chances of securing more pro-poor and pro-working class policy. But there's been a growing importance for me in recognising the consequences of independence in the fight against global imperialism, which can't be divorced from the capitalism that powers it. One of the outcomes of Scottish independence would be a new position for Scotland in global politics, with a seat at institutions like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and many others. As it stands, global governance is not advancing the rights and interests of the majority of the world, whether working class communities in Scotland or the citizens of the global south. The economic institutions are built on rigged rules, which prioritise profit-making for big firms, while leaving workers and poor people everywhere to grapple with increasing precarity, austerity, and shredded social safety nets. Socialism for the rich and exploitation for everybody else. There's one direction with these rules, and that is a deteriorating race to the bottom and the massive financialisation of our economy and our public goods. While the global elite in both North and South extract profits, the rest of us scrap it out between us. And that's because capitalism segments labour, creating different tiers of exploitability. While the majority of us are all wage dependent, some of us are at the top of this hierarchy of exploitability. Workers in wealthy countries with a modicum of a welfare system like our own, white people in settler or colonising nations, men the able-bodied, and consequently others are at the bottom. The majority of people in the south who work in informal jobs with no safety net, refugees, women, disabled people, racialised groups. We don't need to look far to see how this functions to prevent us all from reclaiming a radical future. Take vaccines during the pandemic. Wealthy governments ploughed more than $100 billion of public money to get innovation off the ground for those vaccines, but left all the power of the patents in the hands of pharmaceutical companies. These companies are interested in generating scarcity and have used this tactic in the past to keep prices up while people die. Governments like our own hoarded more vaccines than they needed because they can afford to, And now, while myself and I'm sure plenty of those listening have already had their jag, the current trajectory for the global south to get full vaccination is 57 years. Of course, on the surface, this looks like the wealthy countries are looking out for their own, putting their people first, but nothing could be farther from the truth. This is a false division between us and the unvaccinated in the poorer parts of the world. As long as the virus is able to spread, it has a chance of mutating, building resistance, and reinfecting us all. Governments in the South recognise this and have called for the patents to be freed at the World Trade Organization, the UK and the EU. And up until recently, the US have been, as well as a few other WTO members, have blocked this proposal. They're more interested in being patrons to the pharmaceutical company profits than ending the pandemic for everyone, but are happy for us to think that they're being charitable and looking out for us. Meanwhile, the vaccines have made 9 new billionaires in the pharmaceutical industry. The persistence of imperialism in the global economy is something an independent Scotland could resist in solidarity with formerly colonised countries and for the interests of a more equitable future here in Scotland and everywhere else. There's, of course, the added benefit of dismantling the British imperial state, a net benefit for the future of an internationalist world order. We could use our position in these institutions to uphold and grow the radical traditions that we have of internationalism here in Scotland. I'm sure we've all seen Ne Passeran, the story of workers in East Kilbride who downed tools and refused to service and repair engines for the Chilean Air Force's British-made jet fighters due to the atrocities carried out in Chile by the Pinochet dictatorship at a time when Thatcher was buddies with Pinochet. Weapons are still made here in Scotland. Another example that's commonly known is the bureaucratic resistance to apartheid. While Thatcher supported the apartheid regime, Glasgow City renamed St George's Place, the location of the South African consulate, as Nelson Mandela Place in his honour. And then recently in Kenmure Street, where people of East Pollokshields and the South Side refused to let the Home Office take their neighbours away, rejecting the UK's inhumane border regime. I apologise that many of these examples are Glasgow specific, and that's a consequence of me being a Central Belter. Even the SNP's own manifestos on foreign policy in the 70s backed the new international economic order, a set of proposals advocated by the countries behind the decolonisation and non-aligned movements to end economic colonialism and dependency through a new interdependent economy. These proposals are just as powerful today. There's a huge risk, however, in my mind, that independence would be captured by elite or ignorant interests who would not challenge this system. But this is more important than ever when we have a shrinking timeline to reverse course from a system that is currently hurtling us all towards extinction, exacerbating climate change and further dispossessing people from their lands and their livelihoods. We can't let an independent foreign policy mean ingratiating ourselves with powerful countries and entering the race to the bottom on workers' rights and taxation. We can't jump on the bandwagon of using the massive industrial transformation the world needs to tackle climate change to just be a means of reasserting global dominance of economies like our own. It hasn't served the majority of people here, and it won't in the future. Instead, I want an independence against exploitation everywhere, won by an indie movement that takes internationalism as a starting point. And that means working now to dismantle the roots to an imperial independent Scotland and strengthening the foundations of global solidarity. Cheers, folks.
Thanks very much, Katie, and welcome to Brenda Eadie, who's our second speaker. Brenda is a trade unionist with NHS Workers for Fair Pay Scotland, and she seems to have connected to this without any problems. So congratulations on that, Brenda, and over to you.
Hi, thanks. So I'm one of the organisers of the Grassroots campaign that's been leading the NHS in their protests and stuff, fighting for a pay restoration. So kind of to take you to the start, this kind of started in lockdown last year when all other public sectors were offered a reward for their efforts during COVID. Now, nurses, NHS workers, we were all left out of that because of an old pay deal with the agenda for change. So it came to light that actually nurses are they've lost over 20% of their wages in the last decade, which actually equates to 15% below inflation. That's where every single NHS worker is right now, 15% below inflation. As inflation has been rising every year, our wages haven't. We've been falling further and further and further below that line, taking workers slowly and steadily into poverty. So now you've got NHS workers working 60 hours a week to make up the deficit of their wages so that they're getting paid in line with inflation and they're able to then pay their bills. But these workers are then, many of these workers are then actually going to have to access many of the food banks throughout Scotland just to put food on the table, because after paying their bills, they've got nothing left. So we decided to get this grassroots campaign together and work alongside our colleagues down south. But it seems that our kind of campaign is taking a different turn now for down south, who have been offered 1%. We have been offered 4% up here in Scotland, which looks really good on paper. It looks really, really good to the people of Scotland, to everybody. Oh, the nurses, NHS workers, that's brilliant, they're getting 4%. That 4% takes workers, many of the workers, further back into poverty. That 4% takes your newly qualified nurses, which, let's face it, are the future of our Scottish NHS. Or these newly qualified nurses, they need to have some sort of incentive to join. But right now, that 4% is actually giving them another pay cut of £45 a month, because it takes them into the higher tax bracket of 21%, forcing them to pay more tax, more national insurance. It then makes their it then makes their pension contributions higher as well, which in turn leaves them worse off for getting the 4% than before they got it. That's not an incentive to retain and build with NHS, which is what we're having to do. The NHS, let's face it, in blunt words, the NHS is dying. It is actually dying in front of our eyes. This year is the 73rd birthday of the NHS, and we plan on celebrating it, but we don't want this to be the NHS's last birthday. If the NHS dies and we can't retain and recruit staff, the Scottish people aren't going to have their healthcare system. What's going to happen to these people when they can't afford their medications monthly, their life-saving medications, insulin, heart medication, cancer treatments? These all cost a phenomenal amount of money, let alone just going to your ordinary GP surgery or an ordinary, like calling an ambulance. If you look at the States, because they're all privatised already, if you look at the States, it's £5,000 just to phone an ambulance. Who can afford that? That is really going to be detrimental to our recovery in Scotland. Scotland needs to recover for the coronavirus, and a big part of that recovery needs to be the NHS. It needs to be for the people of Scotland, and we're going to continue to fight for that. So two of the unions have rejected this 4%. So there is an indicative ballot out for industrial action. There's a lot of NHS workers there. They don't want to take industrial action, but they will take industrial action, because it's not just about getting a pay rise. A lot of people have said, look at the greedy nurses, look what they want. The nurses aren't being greedy, we're actually trying to save their jobs just the same as we're trying to save, as other people out there are trying to save their jobs. Like, you know, the McVitie factory, we went along to support them. There's too many people losing their jobs. So yeah, we're standing up for our jobs, and we're standing up for the people of Scotland. And we're saying that part of Scotland's recovery needs to focus on the NHS. The NHS are the heart of Scotland. They're what keeps the people going, keeps them healthy. That's it, really. We're going to continue fighting, and we will continue fighting. We will keep our NHS. We will keep our NHS. So I just hope that people can join and the public can understand why we are fighting. We're fighting for you, not just us. We're fighting for everybody in Scotland for our healthcare service.
Thank you very much, Brenda. And because we've only had two speakers, we've actually finished slightly early in this session. We're just looking to see if Maddie, who is going to be taking our next session, is ready to come back in. And of course, yeah, I mean, I think we're all looking for radical independence because we want a major change. We don't just want to see a change of flag. We want to see a really, really different sort of country. And we've probably all of us been campaigning on different areas and see this as an opportunity to actually get heard in a way that when you're trying to deal with the Westminster government, you know you'll never get heard. It is an opportunity. And I think also, I mean, obviously, as someone who's originally from England, you know, you often get asked, well, aren't you letting down aren't you letting down people in England? It's not letting down people in England. It's providing actually a boost to people in England. If we could share, the threat of a good example would be fantastic for people in England as well. Brenda, you want to come back in?
I just wanted to say that, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of places organising and trying to make the country better, protests and all these kind of things. There is going to be a day on the 3rd of July, and we want to invite everybody from all over Scotland if they want to come. And that is to celebrate that there's so many protests, there's so many campaigns out there that we want to actually celebrate with the public and celebrate with everybody in true fashion. So that's going to be taking part in Glasgow, as I say, on the 3rd of July, and we would welcome everybody to come and see what we're about, to join us, question us, find out what it is we're doing for the NHS, why we're fighting for the NHS, and that's going to be in Glasgow Green. So again, we would like everybody anywhere in Scotland to come and join and see why the NHS are doing what they're doing, and obviously celebrate our healthcare service.